Vineyard. We are a small boutique vineyard based in a region that's called the Southern Highlands, the Barrel, which is about an hour and a half drive south of Sydney. So I've got I'm prepared this time. I converted everything from kilometres into miles and degrees into Fahrenheit. So it's about 90 miles south of Sydney. And we run our vineyard all biodynamically. We run sheep through the vineyard for the entire growing season, which means we use the tractor about 60% less. So that's where our name comes from. You know, I'm trying to be a super sustainable wine label. We do the solar on the winery, and we've got like the sheep in the vineyard and the biodynamics. And these wine bottles are actually low carbon bottles. So they're about half the carbon of a normal glass bottle, which also means they're a little bit lighter to ship around as well. So, you know, I have this ultimate goal that one day I'll be able to take the entire winery off the grid. At the moment, you know, our technology is not quite there for some of the battery storage, but we're doing some work with some geothermal people. And there's this really cool new company in Australia that's actually taking bio waste and converting it into electricity. And so hopefully some of these new technologies means we can get off the grid one day. But let's taste some wine, because that's why we're here. So we are going to, I'm gonna shift. I usually follow the tasting notes, but this morning I decided I'm gonna shuffle it around a bit. So we're going to kick off with our Pinot Grigio, and then we'll pretty much work down the list, but I'm gonna slide the Riesling in after the Chardonnay. A couple of little admin-y things. Those 2-ounce bottles, there's enough in those bottles for 2 people to taste. If you're doing the whole bottle by yourself, which I know most of you are, you may struggle to keep up. And no, it's not a challenge.
Struggle.
The other thing is I do talk about each wine a bit. So just because I mentioned the next wine, you don't have to panic. You don't have to all madly scull your glasses or your bottles. There is plenty of time. And please ask as many questions as you like and comment and everything. So don't be afraid. Just because you're muted out on Zoom doesn't mean you're not allowed to talk, because I love interaction and questions. So Pinot Grigio, we actually are quite well known for Pinot Gris and Grigio in our region. We've only got the Grigio today. I do get a lot of questions asking me what's the difference between the two. So we actually do a Grigio and a Gris. They're both made from the exact same grape variety. So they're both made from the Pinot Gris grape variety. Grigio is the Italian way of doing it, and Gris is the French way of doing it. So the Italians, to an extent, we can say an Italian makes a wine specifically for a food. It's not 100% true, but they are definitely very conscious of food when they're making the wine. The French, on the other hand, the wine is all about the wine. It doesn't mean they match any less with food. It just means that they, I guess they're approaching the winemaking from these two ends of the spectrum. So if you think about Italy, a lot of seafood, maritime climate, a little bit warmer down there. So the Italians are trying to create something that's really fresh and zippy and crisp and steely. So the first thing the Italians do is harvest it nice and early, because as we ripen a grape, our sugar levels are increasing and our acid levels are decreasing. So if we want to make a wine that's fresh and zippy, we harvest it nice and early when it's got that slightly higher acid. And so a traditional Italian style Grigio is normally around about 11 to 12% alcohol. And we call it, as a winemaker, we sort of measure the sugar in the grapes. There's like a million different ways to measure it. There's like, well, I use Beaumet, but there's like Brixes and Olschlers and specific gravity and grams per liter and, you know, 1,000 different ways to measure them. Most winemakers use what we call a Beaumet. And that's because if I take 1 Beaumet of sugar and I ferment it with yeast, I end up with 1% alcohol. So it's just a really easy, there's no calculation required. It's just perfect for a winemaker, 1-to-1. So we harvest these grapes at that 11 to 12 Beaumet, which ends up being 11 to 12% alcohol. So that's the first big difference, because the French style is normally harvested at 13 to 14 bome, so 13 to 14% alcohol. So it's a lot lower alcohol, which gives us a bit higher acid. The second thing, Italians are not afraid of oxygen at all. So when I make this wine, I squeeze off all the juice into a tank, and I fill a bucket from the bottom of the tank, and I tip it in the top, and I fill it from the bottom, and I tip it in the top. And I might do that 10, 20 times until all that juice goes brown from the oxygen. And then I do a really long, slow, cold ferment. And that long, slow, cold ferment, it helps stabilize some flavors, helps give me that kind of green apple aroma. One of the main things it helps with is it helps me create this steely palate. And Italian Grigios, we're always talking about this steely palate. And what do I mean by a steely palate? Have a look around your house or your office or wherever you are. Find a bit of stainless steel and give it a lick. And that's what I mean. Make sure you clean it first, because it's not the best time to be licking surfaces. And it's kind of a sensation on your tongue. It's not really a flavor. It's kind of this like metallic-y sensation, but quite a clean metallic-y sensation on the tongue. And that's what we're trying to recreate when we're making these traditional style Grigios, because it's a very famous sort of, I guess it's a texture more than a flavor in Italian Grigios. Now, Italian Grigios, and I actually find this is the same with a lot of Italian wines. I find them really hard to taste in a wine tasting scenario, because they are so designed to go with food that they almost require the food to release a lot of flavors. And, you know, when you taste this wine now, we're sort of getting apples and pears and some nice stone fruity characters, all fruit driven flavor, but you don't really see any yeastiness. You're not seeing any cheesy characters or lanolin or biscuity characters. And one of my favorite matches with this wine is a fresh oyster, and you match it with fresh oysters, and all of a sudden you get these beautiful like lanolin cheesy characters come out of the wine. You think, where did that come from? Because I taste it now and I can't taste those flavors at all. But then when I have it with an oyster, all of a sudden I taste all these extra flavors. And it's a really great example of what these Italian styles do. And so if you were to take that glass and sit it on your table and try a little bit throughout the evening with different foods at different temperatures, you actually find that the flavors of that wine really change. And every time you pick it up, you sort of see another flavor and another flavor. And you're like, oh, there's another one. Oh, and there's another one. And it's what these Italian styles do, but it makes them really hard to taste in a wine tasting, because all we see is what this wine is offering this second. We're not seeing everything it has to offer. And so these Italian styles are quite difficult. But if you think about how Italians eat food, you know, they start off with that antipasta, and then they've sort of got the first course and the second course, and they have this very long, drawn out sort of grazing period with lots of different foods. So a wine made in this style that adapts with the foods and starts giving you different characters as you eat different foods with different temperatures really suits, I guess, their style of eating. And so it's quite interesting to see how the style of winemaking is just kind of evolved to the way they eat their food. And so Pinot Grigio, Italian way of making it, it's fermented cold, it's harvested early, it's a lot of oxygen in the ferment. It creates these zippy, fresh, crisp, steely styles of wine. And do you guys have any cheeses or anything with you tonight, or are you just tasting the wines?
Just wine.
Just wines? That's good, because normally I tried it with cheeses once, and I spent the whole time with my mouth full of food trying to talk, so it didn't really work. But normally I see everyone else with these amazing like cheese platters in front of them, and I just sit here being jealous of them. So I'm happy that you guys don't have it. I don't have to be jealous. But it is a good match with a Manchego or one of those hard rind cheeses. If you do look for a match one day. So that's our Grigio.
I would always tend to match cheese with a red rather than a white.
Yeah, but certain cheeses, like especially like a Manchego, it's got that kind of sharpness to it, that sharp acidity, which often goes quite well with white wines. But then, you know, cheese and chocolates and any food, that's such a huge range of what's available. usually you can always find something that matches it. It's a good excuse just to eat and drink, because you can say you're doing tasting testing to see what goes well as a matching. I might be able to use that as a tax write-off too.
As a winemaker, I'm sure you can.
Yeah. Product development. So that's our Grigio. Great example of that Italian style, fresh and zippy. It is something that if you sit there and just let it open throughout the evening and taste at different temperatures, you really see it evolve a lot. And I do a lot of these tastings in Australia. But today, this is my first. I now have back-to-back tastings till 10 p.m. tonight. So I'm making sure I've got water in a lot of my glasses.
Can you record the last one? I want to see how drunk you are by 10 p.m.
It's just the stories get longer as the night goes on. The thing is that a lot of times I usually get one or two people who've done one tasting before, because normally what happens, someone does it with one group and then wants to do it with another group. But when they have this Grigio the first time, often they don't have food. And the second time, because I talk about food, they get food. And then they often comment on how much of a different experience it is tasting this wine with different foods versus by itself. And that's something to always remember, especially with a lot of Italian styles. They really are food-driven sort of styles. And that's one of the reasons I love them, because for me, food and wine just sort of go hand in hand. Yeah. I heard you guys talking earlier about glasses and bottles and how to drink it and that sort of thing. I am a massive believer that wine should be about enjoyment. Like, I make a wine because I want to watch you guys enjoying it. I want to enjoy it with you. I want to have fun with you guys. You know, I don't make a wine to sit here going, well, you must drink it at this temperature, this glass, and la, la, la. And so people ask me all the time, what temperature, da, la. I say, drink it the way that makes you happy and the way you enjoy it, because that's what makes us, you know, I don't know any winemakers that really are concerned about how people drink their wine, because they are making it for the fun and the love of wine. They're not making it for the way you drink it and the way you eat it. So if you want to drink it out of a bottle or a glass or however you want, then absolutely do it that way. I think my favorite virtual tasting I've done so far, there was two. There's one where these two guys were in the backseat of a car driving somewhere on the way to go to another wine region to taste, and they're doing our tasting in the backseat, which I thought was cool. And then another one was this girl who was doing some consulting, and she was being flown. She just hopped off the plane in Western Australia, and she was on a bus being into the quarantine camp because of COVID. And she was like being shuffled around this quarantine camp, and she was on her phone with these little bottles drinking as she was going along. I thought that was brilliant. You can do these virtual tastings anywhere. So that's our Grigio. The next wine we're going to taste is our Chardonnay. I'm gonna have a bit of Chardonnay. Do we have many Chardonnay drinkers? Not many? I love asking this in Australia.
I actually recently, since they've become unoaked, I love a Chardonnay, but I also love a full body red, which is why I like Chardonnay.
Yeah, yeah. I love asking it here because on average I get about 20% of people saying yes and 80% of people saying no. But the biggest selling white wine in Australia and in our cellar door is Chardonnay. So I don't know if it's that those 20% of people do a lot of drinking, or either that, or in the 80% that say no, we've got a lot of closet Chardonnay drinkers. But it's interesting that I think Deshaun, you sort of hit it on the head a bit, that the history of Chardonnay, we're all a little bit scarred of, you know, in Australia anyway, and America's sort of following a similar pattern. It seems to be just the way countries follow when they start making Chardonnay. You start off with these quite oaky, buttery styles, and then you move away from that and you start seeing a lot of unoaked, fruity styles. And what I find is a lot of people have a memory of something that's like super oaky or super buttery, or not oaky enough, or not buttery enough, or not fruity enough. And so it's more that everyone's a little bit unsure about Chardonnay. For me personally, Chardonnay is about balance. So I want to see a little bit of oak. I want to see a little bit of butteriness. I want to see a little bit of fruit, but I don't want any one of those flavors to sort of overpower the other flavor. This Chardonnay, when you taste it, it sort of goes through that progression. It starts off with a little bit of that vanilla-y oak. I don't use any brand new oak. I find that the first year in oak gives you really splintery, vanilla-y, like over-the-top flavors. So I use 1, 2, 3, and 4-year-old oak. You then get a lick of butteriness before it sort of goes into those mangoes and grapefruits and citrusy finish. But the key for me is it sort of goes oaky, buttery, mangoey, grapefruity, citrusy. It's not going like oaky and then buttery and then mangoey and grapefruity. It's that consistency and balance of those flavors that I'm looking for. I'm a massive fan of Chardonnay, more so now than I was a long time ago, because they used to be very over oaked and over buttery. I am on a big mission here in Australia to bring Chardonnay back again, to make Chardonnay cool again. I'm going to get hats made up, bring back Chardonnay, because I actually think that we're making here in Australia at the moment some of the best Chardonnays we've ever made. You know, I've been making wine 24 years and I made super oaky styles and I made super buttery styles and I made super fruity styles. And now I'm starting to understand Chardonnay a bit more and how it ages in bottle and how it works. And so I'm finding our styles of winemaking a lot more balanced. And the problem is we've got all these other cool varieties that are coming into Australia. We're not really talking about Chardonnay anymore, and we're making these great examples of them. And so, yeah, I'm on a mission to make Chardonnay cool. I'm getting there slowly. I did a Zoom tasting last week, and one of the young girls on that said she thought Chardonnay was coming back again. I was like, yes, finally. I've been working on it for years.
So, okay, on that. So no one here drinks Chardonnay?
I'm not a Chardonnay fan, but I know some people like it. I'm just not.
It's like kind of like peppery. At least that's what I'm tasting. I don't know what other people are tasting.
Jacob, I want to hear your adjective for this one, since the Pinot was delightful. What's this one?
The Pinot was delightful. I gotta be honest, I don't like this as much as the Pinot. I still like it. I'm gonna hold on. I'm gonna go with, I think peppery is a good word. I don't know what else to describe it.
You get a lot of that sort of savory, spicy characters from the barrels. Yeah.
My mom loves Chardonnay.
I haven't had a chance to try a lot of US Chardonnays yet. I was very excited this year to be launching in America, because the plan was that I'd spend a lot of time over there promoting our wines and tasting your wines. And that's all got put on hold, of course. So at least I can show our wines. I just don't get to taste many American wines. So I'm not sure where on the spectrum of that sort of oaky, fruity scale where a lot of American wines sit now. I know 5 years ago was definitely in that sort of oaky, buttery spectrum, but I'm not sure where it's sitting now.
I think still a lot of that.
Still a lot of that.
Still pretty buttery.
Yeah. So this is a great match for a brie. I just love that. No matter what the creaminess is of your brie, that sort of oak, that vanilla-y, buttery, and mango flavors, they come and match the level of the cheese. And I just think it's really cool that it doesn't matter what level the cheese is, the butteriness and mango characters match it in the wine. I just think it's amazing that it never goes over, never goes under. It just sort of comes and matches it. So I love that as one of the matches of this Chardonnay. Next one on the tasting is our semi-dry Riesling. And this is a wine that we actually do two Rieslings. We do a dry Riesling and a semi-dry. And I was sort of tossing up with Simon about which one we would put out in the tasting. And I think that in general, we see a lot of sweeter wines that have this sort of caramelized character in it. And when I do a lot of consulting to big companies and we're fermenting, say, 20,000 litres at one time, that ferment is so strong, you can't stop it. It's literally like me standing in front of a semi-trailer like this trying to stop it. It's just not going to happen. Can I use that word semi-trailer, Sean? Does Americans understand that?
Yeah,
Cool.
I
I threw last tasting I did. I threw a few Australian words around, and people were sort of looking at me a little bit dumbfounded.
Mate, I gotta say, it's probably the accent. I think semi-trailer everyone gets.
I've got a proper broad Australian accent too. Is that right?
Yeah, I had to refine mine, knowing that I was moving over here.
So you just can't stop that ferment. And so what we do is we actually ferment them dry, and then we back add sweetness. And so when you're back adding a sweetness, you end up with a more like caramelized, sugary sweetness to the wine. If you're making it in a more traditional German style, and so that's how we do it, much smaller batches. So we can only do about 3,000 to 5,000 liters, which is about 2,000 gallons, is 7,000 liters, I think. So maybe about 1,500 gallons at a time. We start it fermenting. And when it gets to the sweetness level we want, we chill it and filter it and stop the ferment. And so we're retaining the natural sweetness of the grape rather than adding it. And when you retain that natural sweetness, you end up with a more sort of juicy, lush sweetness rather than that sort of caramelized, sugary sweetness. It's a little bit, when you bite into an apple is really fresh and crisp, but an apple actually has quite a high level of sweetness. But because of the types of sugars and the percentage of those types of sugars and the types of acids and the percentage of those types of acids and the way they interact, an apple tastes really fresh. And it's the exact same with a grape. So if you can maintain that natural balance and those natural sort of sugars and acids, you end up with a more juicy, lush sort of character to the wine rather than that sort of caramelized, little bit cloying sweetness. And so that's how we've made this Riesling. I love this Riesling. So often we try a sweet wine and we immediately want to match it with cheese or with dessert or something towards the end of a meal. For me, on a really nice warm day, nicely chilled, this is a great aperitif. And match it with some antipasta or Waldorf salad or something like that at the beginning of a meal, I think is a really nice way to start the meal. I think because of that sort of more juicy, lush style of sweetness, it goes quite well at the start rather than the end. So, I'm a big fan of that, especially now we're moving into summer finally, because it's, in the Southern Highlands where we are here in Australia, it's actually quite a cold region. And people often think we're so close to Sydney that our temperature's similar, but our lowest vineyard is, I haven't converted this, our lowest vineyard is about 500 meters. So I don't know how that, you do feet, don't you? So that's 3, I think you divide it by about 3. So about maybe 200 feet. And so we're quite a cool region. I think in 2012 and 13, we actually harvested after one of the coldest regions in Australia. So we are right on that border of temperature. Over winter, we're sort of averaging between 24 to 48 degrees. So, it's not freezing. You guys are all in New York, aren't you? So it's definitely not New York freezing, but it's cold. It's cold. For us in Australia, it's cold. And so...
that's warm. So we've got some people here for Boston. That's like warm for Boston. That's pretty much canning weather for the Northeast.
Jacob, what's your adjective for this one?
All right, so I really like this one. I think this is my favorite out of the 3. It was like, wasn't overly sweet to me, and I felt it was kind of fluffy. It tasted like a bed of pillows I want to go lay on after I drink an entire bottle and take a nap.
You know what? I love that description because I am a massive fan of texture, and I love to be able to smell a wine and taste a wine, but I also love to feel it. And one of the things that you're chasing in a Riesling, and especially this style Riesling, we call it talc, and it's like that fluffy talcum powder sort of texture in the mouth. And I'm so glad that someone else can say that. So it's just not me thinking it. You know, sometimes you psych yourself out when you taste a wine enough, you start wondering whether you're really tasting those flavors or not. So absolutely, I reckon that's a great description. Fluffy pillow. I'm going to use that on my marketing notes.
Sean,
Testimonials for the bottle.
what's your review of this one?
You say me?
No, I said Sean. What's Sean's review?
Oh, me?
Yeah.
Honestly,
Yeah.
this one, so I'm not a big wine person, but this one, a little sweetness, not too sweet, feels just great going down. I don't know, I really like this one.
Oh, good.
I'm actually debating on this one or the Pinot Grigio, which one I like best so far.
I'm gonna come at everyone with review requests.
Jacob, let the cat stay.
What's that?
Let the cat stay.
Let him stay. Yeah, his issue is he likes to sit on my keyboard, so I'm not trying to like accidentally send messages I'm not supposed to send.
How come cats always do that? It's like something inbuilt in cats. They're not the most demanding. No, we've just recently, because we run the sheep in the vineyard, it's the first time in 7 years that we've got a potty lamb at the moment. And I've now decided a potty lamb is more demanding than a child or a cat or a dog or any other animal I've ever had to look after. It's a very demanding little animal. So that's our white wines. I've only just started drinking white wines again because here in the Southern Highlands, it has been cold. Well, cold for us. And so normally you can find me with the fire stoked up and sitting in front of the fire with a nice bottle of red. And the first red that we are going to taste today is called the Lost Flock. Now, you don't have to worry about washing glasses or swapping glasses because I try and line the wines up so that the next wine just overpowers the previous one. So don't have to run off or change glasses if you don't want to, but you're welcome to if you do. The Lost Flock, when I came up with this blend, I was actually sitting in front of the fire at home and I was drinking a big Barossa red. Now, Barossa is quite a warm climate region in Australia. It is quite a famous region for making really big, robust, in-your-face reds. And I love some of the velvety tannins and the chocolate notes and the raspberry notes from those big Barossa reds. I just find that quite often they're so heavy that you can have a glass or two and it's just over the top. And so I wanted to create a blend that I could sit in front of the fire and drink the bottle of. Not that I'm telling anyone to drink a bottle of wine by themselves, but it might have been a little bit of inspiration behind this blend. It's essentially a GSM, so Grenache, Shiraz, Mourvedre, but it also has a little bit of Merlot and Petit Verdot. And it is just my soft, delicate drinking red. It's got these beautiful velvety tannins, these sort of raspberry and chocolate notes, this lingering raspberry. It's a wine that I guess I drink a lot of by default. You know, when you go to a dinner party, someone likes Shiraz and someone likes Merlot and someone likes Cabernet. I always grab a blend because it means that everyone can find a flavor in that wine that they love. And so this was a wine I drank a lot of by default because we're not really meant to be having dinner parties. Well, we are now, but for most of this year, we haven't been really allowed to have dinner parties. So I haven't really drunk much of it this year. It's a wine that's really special to us, and that's because of the name, the Lost Flock. Because when you go biodynamic or organic, you're doing it from a really philosophical reasons. Because if I was to make a Shiraz, for example, and put it in the market might say value that at $35. If I then make a biodynamic or organic Shiraz and put it in the market still really only values it at $35. We don't get any increase in value for being biodynamic or organic. It is starting to change a little bit, but it's not quite crossed over that mark yet. The problem with growing a vineyard biodynamically is it's a lot more expensive. And our biggest expense is actually managing the grass. Because in a normal industrial vineyard, all they do is herbicide all the grass, or they herbicide strips underneath the grapevines so they can mow in between. So it becomes quite easy to manage. If you're biodynamic or organic, you don't want to use herbicide. So you spend a lot of time mulching and cultivating and whippersnipping, and managing that grass becomes really expensive. In 2013, we had a caterpillar problem in our vineyard. And the biodynamic philosophy says that if you have insect problems on your land, it's because you don't have enough animals. So we started experimenting with sheep. And first we tried a breed of sheep called a Dorper. And I thought these will be great. They're fairly easy to look after. Their wool falls off, so you don't have to worry about shearing them. So we got all these Dorpers. I was like, yep, perfect. We'll get these Dorpers. Well, a Dorper is pretty much like a sheep. I mean, pretty much like a goat. And they ate half the vineyard. So that experiment did not work well at all. I grew up on a sheep farm. I grew up on a merino farm. And merinos is a different breed of sheep that we classify as a grazing sheep. So a Dorper is a browsing sheep, which means they look everywhere for food and they'll just eat it. A merino is a grazing sheep. So they only look inside their feeding zone for food, and they don't look outside of their feeding zone until they eat the food in their feeding zone. So the merinos, they kind of worked. The grapevine sat here, which was outside of their feeding zone. The bunches hung down just inside their feeding zone. And what we did is we ran 2 electrical wires under the bunches to stop them eating the grapes. The problem that year was when the electricity went out for 2 hours. It's amazing how many grapes a merino can eat in 2 hours. So we lost a lot of grapes that year, but we were getting closer. Eventually, we found a rare breed of sheep called a Hampshire Down. They're a rare breed from the UK. They're a grazing sheep, the same as a merino. Actually, you might be able to see them. You can sort of see them in the background of the photo there. So they're grazing sheep. They're similar as a merino. The biggest difference between a Hampshire Down and a merino is a Hampshire Down is 2 inches shorter. So with the merino, the bunches were inside their feeding zone. With the Hampshire Down, they're outside of their feeding zone. And so it means we could run these sheep underneath the vineyard for the entire growing season. This has solved our caterpillar problem. And at the time, I don't know why I didn't think about it. I was so obsessed with fixing this caterpillar problem. But guess what? Sheep eat grass. And so now the most expensive part of running our vineyard is done for free by the sheep. So they've taken something that is a really expensive philosophical choice, and now our costs are about the same as a normal industrial vineyard. So they really have changed it a lot for us. But the Hampshire Downs are even a cooler sheep than that, because a merino and a Dorper, they flock. And so you end up with these sheep camps where all the manure is in one spot, where there's no grass in that spot. They follow each other through the vineyard. So you end up with these tracts of compaction. A Hampshire Down is a roaming sheep. So they just spread beautifully around the whole vineyard. We don't have any of those problems. It's fantastic for the vineyard. It's an absolute nightmare when I go to shear the sheep, because there's always one sheep wandering around the vineyard that gets missed. And so I always end up with one woolly sheep. I've actually decided that is a really good name for a wine, the woolly sheep. I just got to come up with a wine to match it. But it reminded me, when I make this wine, I stack all the Shiraz barrels in one stack, and all the Merlot barrels in one stack, and all the Grenache barrels in one stack. And those stacks were scattered all around the winery. And it reminded me of the sheep being scattered all over the vineyard. And so that's my very long story on why we call this wine the Lost Flock.
Well, I like the name.
What was that?
I like the name. It's creative. The Lost Flock.
The Lost Flock. The sheep are so fundamental in everything we do now. Like, to an extent, I can almost say that half of what we do now is actually sheep farming. And they really have changed. Well, I give you that example of how they've changed the cost structure for us. But one of the reasons we're so sustainable is because of the sheep. And they're saving us 60% of our tractor use, which is a huge amount of tractor use. They enable us to manage the pasture in what we call a very regenerative techniques. And what that means is we're actually sequestering twice as much carbon in our soils as a normal biodynamic vineyard. And that's 100% because of the sheep. I am a huge believer in regenerative agriculture and sustainable agriculture, and that it actually has a massive role to play in carbon capture and control of carbon. I could rabbit on all afternoon about sheep and the use of animals in agriculture and carbon. but we're here to taste wine, so I'm not going to. But this is a Lost Flop. It is a wine that is very special to us because of the name. It is a wine that I definitely do love to sit back and polish a bottle of in front of the fire, just because it does have that slightly more delicate edge to it. It's not a big, robust style of red. It's like nice, delicate style. And a wine that I like. I love showing this here and as well as over to you guys in America, because a GSM blend traditionally in Australia is a really big in-your-face sort of wine. And so to put together a similar blend from a cooler region that shows just that nice delicacy and that softness, I really like showing it. So it's one of my favorite reds, one of my many favorite reds. I'm not allowed to have a favorite red though, because it's like they're my children. You can't pick your favorite child.
No, I like it. I was gonna say, like, when I was in South Africa, that was the first time I drank a lot of Petit Verdot.
Yeah, they do a lot in South Africa, and I love the sort of velvety tannin structure that you get from Petit Verdot.
I really like it. It's really good.
Interesting blend.
Jacob, what's your adjective?
We can't hear you.
I can hear you, Jacob.
You did say you were a white man though.
Julia, what's your adjective?
Sorry, my AC's on, so I was on mute. I like it. It's just like a little dry for me. I'm also not the biggest like red wine fan, so that's like maybe I'm biased, but it's really good.
I got a weird thought. Anyone else get like a slight hint of bacon? I don't know why. I like feel like I got a slight hint of bacon in it.
I didn't, but hey, to each their
That's
own.
my personal thing. I liked it.
Really?
Might have been the oakiness, something, but I don't know. I got that.
I don't usually do red, but it's good and very easy to drink. I can see how you drink a bottle by the fire.
It's
and it's a sort of a style that's more designed. You don't have to have food, so yeah.
Good. I've been hungry without the cheese talk before, so no food for this one.
I love cheese.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you. What's
All right. I struggled with a word for this. And the word I come up with is going to sound mean, and I don't mean it that way, but I'm going to go with basic. And what I mean that is like everyone needs a fundamental basic red wine in their life. And I feel like this is the wine for me for that like basic red wine that I want to drink. I don't mean it in a bad way because I don't normally like reds, and I actually really like this.
You know, I 100% know what you're saying, because I mean, this wine is designed for me. It's my everyday have a glass wine. It's not I don't have to have a meal with it. I don't have to have like some serious like wine glass or anything. This is, I mean, I guess the word is a quaffing style red, you know. It's just put it next to your couch there and just drink your bottle. And it's, you know, it's only, you know, for Australia, 13% alcohol. That's not high in Australia, you know, so that's sort of in that medium range. So it is that sort of like that nice everyday style for sure. So the next one we're going to taste, and I love showing this wine. This is our Shiraz, and all the wines we've tasted so far, I mentioned that I love texture. And to get that texture, I use slightly more European techniques because it gives me a little bit more texture. The problem with those European techniques is they often dull the fruit characters a little bit. If I'm making wine using slightly more contemporary winemaking techniques, I create a wine that's got a lot more vibrant fruit, a little bit less texture, but you pick up in that vibrancy of the wine. And so this Shiraz, I make it deliberately in that contemporary sort of vibrant fruit style because that's what we are quite well known for here in Australia. If you ask me to pick a wine that typifies young sort of contemporary winemakers of Australia, it would be a cool climate Shiraz. And we are very famous around the world for our Shiraz, but we're also very famous around the world for the style that we're about to taste now, this cool climate style. I've been making wine, as I said, for 24 years, and I've played around with Shiraz since day one. The first job I had when I finished school was working for a famous winery in Canberra called Clonakilla, and they're famous for their cool climate Shiraz. And so Shiraz has sort of been drilled into my winemaking history since then. And I've tried all these different techniques of winemaking of Shiraz, you know, these old school Rhone Valley techniques using stems and seeds, and these cutting edge sort of cutting edge like Californian techniques where we're doing a lot of cold maceration and those sort of things. And the really funny thing about Australian cool climate Shiraz grapes, they just don't want to be fiddled with. They want to be left alone. And so the easiest hands-off winemaking that we do is with this Shiraz, but it just works. You know, we de-stem it, we ferment it without the stems for about 3 weeks, goes into oak for 12 to 18 months, and then into bottle. So it's really easy hands-off winemaking, but it creates these beautiful, delicate styles. And one of the things that I love most about these cool climate styles that we get from Australia is the structure. If you taste that wine and think about where the furriness and where the sort of crisp acid in that wine is, you kind of get a line down the middle of the tongue. You get this nice line. And what that does is create structure around the wine. So if I'm making a Shiraz in a warm climate region, I get a huge amount of this complex, interesting fruit. And it just sort of goes, there you go. It gives me all at once. It's like, whoa, wow, that's amazing, but all at once. If you're making Shiraz from these cool climate regions, because of that beautiful structure, they create all this complex, intense fruit flavor. But because of that structure, they're kind of just giving you that flavor. And just giving you that flavor rather than throwing it at you all at once. And that's one of the things that I really love about these cool climate Shiraz from Australia is that way it just sort of keep slowly handing you the flavor rather than chucking it at you once. And this is a great example of that style. You know, this is, if you drink a lot of cool climate Australian Shiraz, this is exactly what you'd expect to get. Like it is made exactly that way. It tastes that way.
On that point, so when I was living back in Sydney, I pretty much just drank Shiraz. That was my go-to red wine. I love red wine, but it's not here to the same degree. Obviously, has everyone had an Australian Shiraz?
No, actually, my sister was, when she saw this package came in, she was like, "Wow, a Shiraz! Like we don't really get these in the States." So she was like, "After you taste it, let me know, and then see if we can get it in the States here." Because she's like she's a big fan of it, but you don't really get it here. She was telling me. I didn't know that until then.
I just for the difference between the Shiraz and the first one we had. I only drink red wine. I don't really like white wine. But you can like vastly like feel the tannins in your mouth. Does everyone feel those? Because like they attach to my mouth at least. I don't know.
One of the things you will notice of all our wines they are really quite different. So, I mean, all I have ever done my entire life is make wine. And so Tractorless Vineyard originally was a side project. So I was doing a lot of contract winemaking and consulting, and I was just getting a little bit bored of doing the same old winemaking. And I started Tractorless purely for me. It was all about the way I want to make wines, the way I want to drink wines. And so every wine is really specifically made for a reason. So, you know, the Shiraz was made to really, not just to make another Shiraz, it was made to represent cool climate Australian contemporary style of Shiraz. You know, when I make the Lost Flock, the blend, it was made to be a soft, delicate, easy drinking next to the fire red. You know, the Grigio was meant to be an Italian style Grigio, not like an Australian style, not a contemporary style, an Italian style. You know, everything is really quite specific. And, you know, often in Australia anyway, you'll go into a winery and a lot of their wines have a similar character because they have that influence from the winemaker, and he or she has a very similar techniques to their production, and so you get similar characters. Because each wine is very specific as what I want it, they're very quite different. And it's one of the things you really do pick up on when you taste all our wines is like, wow, there's not two wines there that I would even remotely think is from the same place because they are so completely different.
Jacob, what's
That's
your
our Shiraz. What was that?
No, it's Jacob's time for his adjective.
I say.
So Jeff actually said the word that I was going to say, and I actually think this is very vibrant. I really like this too.
And it's a testament to that technique. Like, you
Exactly.
know, those other wines, they're nice and textural that we've tasted, but they just don't have that little vibrancy. And that's just using this different technique of winemaking gives you that little bit of vibrancy in the fruit. And you often see it in the color as well. Just a little bit more of a vibrant, bright color to the wine.
Corey,
We got one more.
Corey, what's your review?
So my review is I think it's very smooth, especially like going down the throat. It makes you feel like all like warm inside, kind of like a hug. It's pretty nice. I like it.
That was sweet, Corey.
Jeff, you didn't pair this with food.
One of the coolest thing is that this if you asked me to pick a food that matched this, it would be an Australian style barbecue. So it's kind of, I guess, equivalent to your char grill. Is that right? It's not like you're smoky. You don't want too much smoke, but it goes really well with like just lightly charred red meat. So that's probably what we would call Australian style barbecue. And I think it's a great match for those that sort of food.
I took a bottle of this to a friend's house and we had it with ricotta. It was delicious.
Oh, wow. Yum. Is this the one did you get a bottle? Is this the bottle you all got? The Shiraz?
No, we got the Cab Sav.
Oh, the Cab Sav. Oh, cool. That's a cool one. That's a good segue into the Cab Sav then, isn't it? So this is actually a really interesting one to end on because it's quite different. So when I was at uni, I was really lucky because there was about 6 people doing the winemaking degree when I did it. And then 2 years after me, there was like 200. So I became a winemaker before it was cool to be a winemaker. But what it meant was I got to try some amazing wines because one of our lecturers, Nick Bulliard, he's a master of wine. It meant he could just grab one bottle and bring it into the winery and all of us, the 6 of us, could taste it. When there's 200 people, he couldn't just grab a bottle. So I got to try some amazing wines. And one of the wines that really sticks out is Nick tells this great story. He was down in Adelaide, and that's one of the capitals of South Australia, but it's one of the very big wine regions in Australia. And he was walking down the street and he walked past this old pub that was being renovated. And they had a big garbage bin out the front. And he happened to look in the bin and he saw down the bottom this bottle of wine. So he just grabbed it out and he brought it into uni and we tasted it. And it turned out to be a 1956 McGill's Burgundy. So it was a 46-year-old wine. It was from the McGill Vineyard in Australia, is the original Penfolds Vineyard before they built Adelaide. So this is like, Penfolds is a very super famous Australian wine label. This would have been one of their first ever wines. And this was an incredible wine. And ever since tasting that wine, I have been completely obsessed with wanting to make a wine that's going to age 50 to 100 years. And when you look around the world at who's famous for making these wines that age and age and age, and the region that consistently comes up is Bordeaux. And so the people from Bordeaux, the Bordelais, they created this technique that we call post-ferment maceration. And that's what we use in this Cabernet. And what it is when I'm making a red wine, a lot of people don't realize, but if you take a red grape and you squeeze it, the juice and the pulp inside is actually white. So to make a red wine, you need to extract all that color from the skins. And so what we do is we ferment it with the skins to extract that color. And that ferment process takes probably about 3 or 4 weeks. If I then leave those skins and seeds and stems sitting with that wine after the ferment, it's called post-ferment maceration. In Australia, we play around leaving it for sort of 1-2 weeks to 1-2 months. In California, with some of their Merlots, they go up to 3 months. In Bordeaux, they routinely leave it 12 to 18 months. And what it does is it solves 2 problems that we have when we're aging a bottle of wine. The first problem we have when we age a bottle of wine is the fruit level. So imagine a normal wine might have a fruit level here. And as we age it, that fruit level slowly drops and the savory level comes up. And the premium drinking is when they're about the same. And that might be, say, 10, 15 years. So if we want to get to 50 to 100 years, we need to start with a huge amount of stable fruit so that when it balances with that savory character, it's right up here, that 50 to 100 year mark. So that's our first problem. Our second problem is a structural problem. And, you know, I don't know if you've drunk much young Cabernet. When you have a young Cabernet, it has this kind of edgy tannin to it. It almost feels like the tongue is being coated with chalk or something. It's really grippy and kind of makes you want to do that with your tongue. Those edgy, chalky tannins are short chains. And when you age a bottle of wine, those short chains join together into a long chain. And a long chain is soft and velvety. So that's one of the good things that's happening as we age a bottle of wine. Imagine I have a bottle of wine and I have 100 short tannins in that bottle. And as I age it, those 100 short tannins join to 50 long tannins, which then join to 25 really long tannins. So I've got 25 of these soft, velvety, sweet tannins in that wine. The problem is 25 is not enough. And so the whole structure of that wine falls apart. So this process, it solves both these problems. I've got a tank of wine sitting there and it's full of skins and seeds and stems for 18 months. And so there's thousands of those short chain tannins floating around that tank, which forces them together into a long chain tannin. So when I bottle that wine, I'm bottling it with 100 long stable tannins rather than 100 short unstable tannins. So that's how the technique solves that structural problem. The fruit problem, I have absolutely no idea how the French figured this out, because when you're making this wine, at no stage does it taste fruity. And I remember it would have been sitting in the winery for about 3 months. And I remember walking out and taking a sample, and I smelt it and I tasted it and I thought, oh my God, I have completely ruined this wine. It tastes absolutely disgusting. I started calling some winemaking friends, some mentors in the industry, go, oh, guys, have you tried this technique? You know, what happened? What did you do? And they all said the same thing. They all said, yeah, we tried it. We got to 3 months. It tasted so bad. We pressed it off. We put it into oak. Don't worry, Jeff, you'll be able to blend the flavor out. So I have everyone in Australia telling me, just press it off, you'll be fine. Everyone in Bordeaux is saying, no, you just got to leave it. And so, as I said, Tractorless was a side project. And so I decided to leave it. And I left it 12 months. And it really didn't taste that much better. And I left it 18 months. And I could feel that those tannins had polymerized. I could feel that velvety character, but it had no fruit character. It just tasted like stems and skins and seeds. It wasn't really nice at all. And I put it to oak for 18 months. And I remember bottling this wine. I remember thinking, am I doing the right thing here? You know, I don't get any fruit flavor in this wine. Am I about to end up with pallets of wine that I can't sell because it's not fruity? I thought, well, I've got the bottles. I've already started. We may as well do it. So we bottled it. And then about 12 months after in bottle, out of nowhere, it was like this explosion of fruit. It's unbelievable. It's really intense cassis, capsicum, tomato leaf. So really typical cool climate Cabernet characters. And I'm now really excited about this wine because it's doing exactly what the French said it would do. So in 50 years' time, we can get back on Zoom and I can tell you whether this experiment worked or not. Because I still to this day have not met anyone in Australia that has used this technique to the same levels that they do in Bordeaux. And that to that 18 level. The longest I've heard of in Australia was a research project that Wine Australia did, and they took it to 6 months. And the reason for that was they got to that 3 month period and they tasted and analyzed it. They went to 4 months, tasted, analyzed it. There was no change. 5 months, no change. 6 months, no change. So they stopped the project. And after doing this, I can tell you between 3 months and 12 months, nothing happened. between 12 and 18, everything happened. And what do the French say? 12 to 18. So whatever's happening in that wine, there's something happening. I'm really excited about it. It's in that fruity spectrum now. You know, it's a 5-year-old Cabernet, but it's still very fruity. And I'm amazed every time I open a bottle, I'm just amazed at how stable that fruit is. Like by 5 years, I would have expected that fruit character to really have dropped a lot more than it has. And so it's doing what they say. It's really hanging in there. I find this is a great match at the moment because of that cassis capsicum with roast lamb. I find it goes really nicely with roast lamb. And I'm really excited to try this over the next 50 to 100 years. I'll tell my son on my deathbed that, yes, the project worked. Do it again. But it's an interesting one to end on. And it's definitely something that's quite different that we don't really get to see that often in these sort of more contemporary winemaking countries like America and Australia.
Lizzie, what are your thoughts?
I love the cab because the cab's my favorite.
Yeah, I love this one too, because to me, this is like that perfect, like for me personally, it's that perfect go-to because I love super dry red, like tasting it in your mouth, but like it's fruity enough that you could literally like have it for the day. You don't like have to sit down or like digest it. Like it's light still.
I would say my two favorites were the Cab and the Lost Flock. I really liked those two.
I was gonna say the Cab is like, to me, like that old school like red. Like I feel like I'm in like an old school like Manhattan steakhouse. I don't know if you guys have ever been in a Manhattan steakhouse, but like I sit down in one of those and like bring me a bottle of something that's gonna go good with my steak, and this is what they bring me. That's what I feel like with this.
I feel like that's a win.
It's a win. Yeah, it's an interesting start. Like I'm really loving watching this age in bottle because it's given me a lot of insight. And this is one of the things as a winemaker, you know, a lot of what we learn is just by doing it or tasting it, because you can't. I probably learned 10% of what I know at uni, but your timelines, like to make that wine itself was what, 3-4 years before it was even in bottle. It's, you know, probably 3 years before it was in bottle. It's now 2 years in. We won't really see the final output of this wine to see the aging for another 30 or 40 years. So your timelines on these experiments are massive. So it's really, I mean, I enjoy it. It's fun. 30
years. There's no way that any wine is lasting 30 years in my cupboard. No chance.
Well, I think 96% of wines are drunk within 24 hours of them being purchased. So that's what it's like in my house almost. I've got this great wine cellar and I fill it up and then I have a dinner party and we drink it. So nothing gets aged. Actually, the best thing of COVID is my wine cellar is 12 months old now because we haven't had dinner party. So there is a silver lining for sure. So guys, that's everything I've got for you today.
That was great.
I hope you enjoyed it.
That was
Thank
awesome.
you so much.
Yeah, this is really
Thank
fun.
you.
Great, thank you.
This is a lot of fun.
Thank you.
I would love you guys to follow us on all our socials. I'll put some links up because these virtual tastings are really transformed what we do, especially at the moment. But even we'll do these forever now. You know, for me, it's a Friday morning and I'm showing my wines to all you guys in New York. Like, what a cool concept that I can actually share my wines with people around the world. We're actually starting to do a few of these virtual tastings with people from New York and like teams that are across the country as a way to catch up. So people, it's a bit early for us if you're in New York, but in California, our lunchtime is about the evening time. So that lines up a bit nicer when you're doing an Australian and American tasting. But yeah, so definitely please follow us on Facebook and Instagram. There's some links up there too for if you want to do a virtual tasting privately. All you need is 10 people. You can do it wherever you want. So please tell your friends and family.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. So I get to do another one now. So I'll love you and leave you. You guys can party on with the other half of your bottles, or did you all polish off your entire bottles?
Oh, yeah. Mine are gone.
All gone. All gone.
We're meant to be doing half a bottle. What are you talking about? Well, guys, thanks very much.
Thank
I
you.
might
Thank
see you
you.
over in Australia one day. I might come and visit there
Yeah.
one day if we're allowed to travel.
We can travel.
That's if Australia allows us to come back in.
Yeah.
You're allowed anywhere.
All right. Thank you
Thank
so
Have a
much.
good
Thank
evening.
you.
See you guys later.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Enjoy your bottle of wine.